Let me see, let me share my screen here. I'll just do, yeah, share sound, perfect. Okay, can everyone see this? Yes, great. Okay, so I guess I'll start the slideshow. I'm gonna be going back and forth a little, but we'll do what we can. This. Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks for bearing with me as I figure my stuff out. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. We're going to talk about chords a little bit, especially triads. I know that there's been some talk about the barbershop chords like earlier this week and stuff, so hopefully I'll just be adding to that knowledge. So to start out, if it'll let me, there I am. So just quick intro stuff. Who am I? I recognize a lot of you, but I don't recognize others, and probably the same goes for me. Probably many of you don't know me or recognize me. But my name's Meg. I've been a Sweet Adeline since I was 16. So I think it's almost 9 years. So like 8.5 years. Which is wild. But I started singing with Coastline when I was 16, and I've been singing with Coastline Show Chorus ever since then. I sing tenor. I sing tenor with Carried Away Quartet, and I am the tenor section leader for Voices United mixed chorus as well. So that's sort of my background. I have a bachelor's in music and a graduate certificate in vocal performance. So I've got some of that background. And let's see. Is there like background noise? It actually might be me. My sister's
it is you. I just looked.
I'm sorry. Yeah, my sister and her boyfriend are cooking in the kitchen, and I'm sort of holed up in my office. So I apologize. I'll try to oh dear. I'll send her a text quick. Anyway, so some Zoom etiquette things just for the purposes of this class. I know Zoom classes are super weird. At least I've had weird experiences teaching them because they're not in person. It's a very different dynamic. So I'd love to hear you guys like speak openly about questions or other things that you might have. Yeah, so if you do have a question, feel free to type it in the chat if you want to type the whole question, or you can just type the word question or I have a question, and we'll sort of get you in the queue and stuff. So you can ask it openly. And if at any point, again, this is sort of weird because I don't know people's backgrounds and I don't know where everyone's coming from. So if at any point I'm going too fast or too slow or whatever, feel free to voice concerns there. Cool. And then by using what we know, scales and intervals is this, what I mean by that is we'll sort of be reading music a lot. Like there's going to be a lot of sort of visual notes on the page, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And if you're not, I'll try to explain things in sort of a context of like intervals and using scales, because we've all sung those in chorus, most of us anyway. Our little 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like those sorts of exercises, we can all sort of contextualize this information that way. So are there any questions or comments before we get going? All right. The screen of mine. Okay, so we're going to talk about triads to start off. I think triads are sort of the meat of like chords, obviously, but even seventh chords that we're gonna sort of learn about all kind of are based off of triads. So what is a triad? It's a chord that's stacked in thirds. So you can see sort of this visual here. These 3 notes are stacked in thirds. It's just one line away from each other or one space away. That's a third. In simple form, or sometimes root position, depending on the context. And I'm going to sort of throw a lot of vocabulary just out there. You don't have to like memorize it or anything. It's just like it's good to sort of like contextualize things. So don't worry about all the vocab and stuff. But in simple form, a triad is stacked in thirds within one octave. So you can see here, I'm gonna exit really quick. You can see here, this is all within the same octave, whereas in barbershop, like spoiler alert, we're gonna be looking at this later on. You can see the notes here are much more sort of spread out over more than an octave, sometimes 2 octaves, depending on the arrangement, etc. So yeah, so when we talk about simple form, it's just sort of these, we'll be talking about that later. It's useful to identify chords in that way. So triads can consist of any 3 notes. It doesn't necessarily have to be thirds, but for our purposes and most often in sort of common practice and in barbershop, triads will refer to chords that are built with thirds. And that's different combinations of either minor thirds or major thirds. So we have these 2 different thirds to sort of work with most of the time. So you can see here, the lowest note in the chord when the chord is in simple form is called the root. And the other names, the names of the other notes are based on their interval above the root, right? So we've all heard like, oh, berries, you're on the 5th of this chord, and tenors, you're on the 3rd. That just refers to the interval above the root of the chord, right? I think I'm gonna, yeah, actually, let's do this. Okay. So there are 4 sort of main triads based on, so we have 2 different thirds, the minor third or the major third, and then we have 2 sort of combinations of them to work with. So 2 times 2 is 4, so we have 4 combinations. And there are different ways you can sort of conceptualize triads or 7th chords as well. Some people like to conceptualize them as different thirds stacked on top of each other. So like in the case of like the major triad, some people think of it as 1, 3, 5 or do, re, mi, or, you know, this is the root, this is the third, this is the 5th. But some people like to think of it, okay, a major triad is a major third and then a minor third on top. If that's useful, I think it's more useful for 7th chords, but what's useful for me won't necessarily be useful for you and vice versa. So the way that this sort of chart sort of posits these 4 different triads are sort of on a spectrum from like the diminished triad over here on the left as the most like squished together triad, and then all the way to the augmented triad, which is a bit more spread out. So if you're thinking of it as in thirds, diminished triad is minor third on top of each other. The minor triad is minor third, major third. The major triad is switched, so major third, minor third. And then the augmented is 2 major thirds stacked on top of each other. And we'll get a sort of better visual aid here. But you can see all of these are built on C. Which means C is the root of the chord. So really quick, I'm going to, I'll go to this slide quick. This is sort of another way to think about it, and I'm going to switch my tab in a second to sort of demonstrate this better. But these are the 4 different chords, and these sort of descriptions refer to them as, rather than like thirds stacked on top of each other, it's sort of all in reference to the root of the chord. So you have the root, and then you have a major third above the root, and then you have a perfect 5th above the root in the case of the major chord, etc. And let me pop over here. If you haven't used musictheory.net, or if you haven't heard of it or whatever, it's a really fantastic resource, especially for beginners in music theory. You can see there's like a ton of information, and it's so clear. I rave about this anytime I sort of teach music theory because it's free and it's very clear. So we'll sort of click on this intro to chords lesson here. So we kind of learned about this. It's a combination of 3 or more notes. And then so we have the major triad, okay, is built with a major third and a perfect 5th from the root. So if this sort of visual is confusing you, maybe you don't read music as well, you can always go back to sort of your piano and determine the intervals just based on half steps, right? So that's sort of like, if all else fails, just go back to the piano and count out the half steps. I've had to do this. I did this all throughout college, so it's a fail safe. But so let's see. So we have the root C. We have to go up a major third, so we go up 4 half steps to E. And for the perfect fifth, we go up 7 half steps to G, right? We've all sung major chords. We know what they sound like. You know, we generally know what they look like. That's just your typical do, mi, sol in the major scale. This kind of goes through different keys here, but we won't do that. So next up, we got the minor triad. It's created with a minor third and then a perfect fifth above the root, right? So we have the C. We have this sort of third and the fifth, but we'll adjust sort of the accidentals. Accidentals is just a fancy word for sharps or flats. So now we switch to the keyboard and we count out our half steps. So we need a minor third. So it's 3 half steps this time. Then you go back up the root to the root and then count up 7 half steps for the perfect fifth. So minor chord, C, E flat, G. So it's a minor third and then a perfect fifth. And let me see, can you guys hear this? Cool. Okay. I know I'm sort of moving fast, and it's because I'm trying to pack a lot of info into sort of a short amount of time. So I apologize. Is this clear so far? Sort of like what I'm talking about with sort of different ways to think about chords. We'll get into some meatier stuff, I promise. Okay, so this is the minor. So now major and minor are sort of the two that we sing in barbershop, probably the most, like the major chord, obviously, minor chord sometimes. So yes, okay, so now we'll talk about the augmented triad. That's the spread out one, right? Anytime you hear augmented in music, if it refers to an interval, if it refers to a chord, it can refer to a whole bunch of things. But anytime you hear the word augmented, it basically just means wider or larger. And it usually means you're raising something by a half step. Not always, but that's generally a rule of thumb. So an augmented triad is built with a major third and then an augmented fifth, which is you're just raising the fifth by a half step, or again, 2 major thirds on top of each other. So we sort of do this whole thing. We go to our keyboard, same process. We count out the half steps, and then we just raise the fifth half step, and we have our augmented triad, which sounds kind of weird. So that's sort of the augmented, very spread out. And lastly, we have the diminished triad, which again is more squished. It's 2 minor thirds. Or another way to think about it, it's a minor third and a diminished fifth, which means you're lowering the fifth half step. So we've got the C, the E, and the G. Again, switch to the keyboard, 3 half steps each for the 2 minor thirds. And this is the diminished chord you're left with. Kind of spooky. That's the spooky one. Cool. Any questions so far? Those are sort of the 4 big ones. Good. Okay. And again, if some of the vocabulary is maybe tripping you up, or you're like, oh, I can't remember, especially when you get into 7th chords, it's like there's a million different types of 7th chords. So I always have to Google them, but it all comes back to those like triads stacked like on each other and different intervals and things like that. So you can always kind of like refer back to what you know. Again, the piano is a really good resource. Cool. So I'm going to actually leave this not in presentation mode because I'm switching tabs a lot, so bear with me. So for inversions, maybe you've heard about inversions before when it comes to either chords or intervals. Basically what that means is triads can be inverted by moving the bottom note up 1 octave. So a chord's inversion is determined by which note is in the bass. So whatever note's the lowest note, that sort of determines which inversion that chord is in. You don't have to necessarily memorize what is root position, what is first or second inversion. It's just good to know that if you're looking at a piece of music, the lowest note is not always going to be the root of the chord. You have to kind of, and we'll do this later, we'll do some analysis of chords. You have to kind of get the collection of the notes that are there and then stack them in thirds and kind of determine, okay, who's on the root? What kind of chord is this? Because it's not always going to be the bass. The bass is on the root a lot of the time, but not always. So that's just a good thing to know. Just as a visual aid, interval. Nope, that's not what I want. There's just so much. Triad inversion, there it is. Just as a sort of, I think this has a good visual. So you see here, this is in root position, C, E, G, right? The root is in the bass or the lowest note of the chord. If we invert the chord, we just move it up one octave. And now that is called first inversion, where the third is in the bass, okay? And then if we do it again, the fifth is in the bass. This is second inversion. And then if we invert it again, we're back where we started in root position. So when we're working with 4-part chords, which of course we sing all the time, it gets a little, there's sort of one extra step where the 7th can be in the bass. It's not super common, but it can happen. So yeah, so just a good thing to know, the lowest note is not always the root of the chord. Cool, is that clear so far? Yeah, this is just a little chart. Root position, first inversion and second inversion. Again, you don't have to necessarily memorize this or anything. Cool. Okay, so now this is a very cluttered slide, and I apologize, but we won't really be going into as sort of in depth about the 7th chords as we did with the triads, just because there's a lot to talk about, and there's a whole class after this about the barbershop 7th, which is like the most important one for our craft. So we'll just sort of talk about 7ths in sort of a conceptual way, but this is sort of a visual aid for you. This has both sort of the ways of thinking about chords, like you have the major, so say for a dominant 7th or a barbershop 7th, basically 7th chords are just the triads with a 7th added on top. So you can take any of the 4 triads that we just learned about, and then there are just different combinations of the 7th. That's kind of how I like to conceptualize it, because then it makes it kind of less daunting to be like, there are like a million different 7th chords, but they're only the 4 sort of main triads. So in the case of the barbershop 7th or the dominant 7th, we've got the major triad, our sort of do, mi, sol, 1, 3, 5, and then a minor 7th up from the root, or a flat 7. And you can see all these different sort of combinations. We have a major triad and a major 7th, or a minor triad and a minor 7th, and et cetera, et cetera. So you'll see some of these in barbershop, and others are not super common. So does that sort of make sense so far? Just sort of adding 7ths onto triads is sort of how you get these 4-part chords. So if we, really quick, again, sort of as a visual. Yeah, a lot of the other chords, there are 5 sort of common practice or like typical 7th chords that we use. And there are a couple more that are used mostly in like jazz and, you know, sort of that weird stuff. So we won't go into those. 7th chord is a combination of a triad and an interval of a 7th. 5 types are commonly used. So this is sort of what we were just talking about, the dominant 7th, just so you sort of can get an idea of what this kind of looks like. Major triad and a major 7th, etc. You know, is this kind of making sense to folks? Cool. Yeah, so let me see. I wanted to get to this down at the bottom. Yeah. Okay. So this chart on music theory is sort of if you're ever stuck and you're trying to identify a seventh chord, and you're like, ooh, I'm not quite sure, what this is called. I'm not quite sure how to notate it or whatever. This is sort of a good aid. So you can kind of determine, okay, I have a minor triad plus this seventh interval, and I can kind of like, okay, what kind of triad do I have? What's the seventh on top? And then it'll tell you what the abbreviation is. The abbreviation is sort of when you're notating music, you've probably heard like, oh, it's a C7, or it's a 4/7, or 4 major 7, or whatever. You maybe have heard that before, but that's sort of an analysis thing that we'll learn a little bit about as well. So yeah, so that's kind of a little aid just to help you with seventh chords. But again, we won't go into them. That's a whole other class. Unless we have time, maybe we'll do that. Here's the chart again. Cool. Okay. So let's see. This is actually going much faster than I anticipated. Does anyone have any questions so far? Questions or concerns? Scroll through. I can't see everybody. Great. Okay. So now we'll sort of get into the fun stuff. So I think it's the fun stuff anyway. And this will be hopefully a little bit more interactive. I just want to do some chord analysis with y'all, and just so you can get an idea of how to do it and like how to apply it to your singing. When you're in a chorus or you're in a quartet and you're like, I'm not quite sure how to tune this chord, like this is kind of wonky, like what chord is this? What should I be doing differently, if anything? So, and then we'll sort of, so we'll do that for a bit. So now what? We have this sort of knowledge of triads. We have this knowledge of how to determine, what's a seventh chord, what type of seventh chord things are. There's still a ton more to be learned. There's some stuff I left out just because there's so much, and musictheory.net can teach it all to you. But we can use the knowledge of chords that we have now to become better barbershop singers. So like I said before, maybe if a chord isn't tuning correctly, you can sort of use this knowledge to be like, okay, I'm on the fifth of the chord. Like, how should I be adjusting my pitch to, to maybe tune this better, depending on what part I'm singing. So I could talk about tuning like it's a whole other week to talk about like the physics of tuning. So what I mean by down here, it says barbershop sevenths versus dominant sevenths. So usually, so when we say barbershop sevenths, we say that sort of separate from dominant sevenths, even though on the page, on the paper, they're the same chord. But we sort of refer to them as barbershop sevenths because they're tuned differently than how they would sound if you were playing it on a piano. And maybe this concept is familiar to a lot of you. But you've probably heard like, oh, like berries, you got to be high on that fifth, or, tenors, you got to sit on that seventh a little bit. So when we sort of make these adjustments, it's not always just because we as singers are singing the note flat. It might just be because we're singing what we're used to hearing, because we're used to hearing, popular music with other instruments. Instruments sort of have to be tuned where each half step is exactly the same sort of mathematical unit away. Otherwise, everything would sound all wonky, but like we have voices that can go all over the place. We can tune however we sort of want. So sort of the goal is to tune things in sort of a mathematically perfect way so that we get those overtones. So that's like the lock and ring that we talk about in barbershop. So when it comes to the barbershop seventh, usually what's different is the third of the chord, the fifth of the chord, and the seventh of the chord are going to be slightly different pitches, really, just by like decimal points, onion skins, if you will. But they're technically like different pitches than what you would play on a piano. So in the case of like the fifth, fifths are like the hardest interval to tune. So because it has to be a lot higher, a fifth of a chord has to be a lot higher than what we're used to singing or hearing on the piano or on any other instrument in order for it to sort of lock. So if you're on the fifth of the chord, you can say, oh, okay, this has to be much higher than I'm maybe used to singing. And it's going to be different for the seventh as well. The seventh actually has to be a little bit flat. The flat seven has to, you kind of have to sit on it just a little bit for the sort of ratios to match up. And when I was doing this research, actually, I came across this article about it or whatever, where it said the third actually had to be a little flat compared to what's on the piano, but like literally pretend I didn't say anything, because we as singers just tend to sing thirds flat. Thirds are also very hard to tune. It's very difficult for the voice to do that. So just naturally, we just sing thirds flat, which is why you're always hearing like leads, you gotta like lift that third, you know? So just forget about the third, it's fine. You didn't hear that from me, but yeah, the fifth especially has to be super, super high, and the seventh, you gotta sit on a little bit. And you can kind of adjust, you'll be able to hear it when it sort of locks, right? So that being said, I'd like to look at a piece of music, again, sort of one we all know, and just sort of analyze a chord and walk you through the process of like how you would do this in real time. So you can, you know, make these adjustments with your quartet or with your chorus, or if you're in a sectional, or, you know, whatever the case may be. So I've circled this chord here, the B chord, just because there's a little accidental there. There's a B natural. So I thought, oh, you know, it's a funky note. Let's see what's going on here. So let's check out what's going on in this chord. So the first thing, step one, when you are analyzing chords, step one in harmonic analysis is to determine what key you're in. So we have two flats, right? And I think there's a class on sort of determining keys and stuff later on in the week, or maybe it happened already. I can't remember what the schedule is, I'm sorry. So we have two flats. We're in the key, anyone want to answer what key we are in? You can just go off mute and shout it out.
B flat.
B flat, yes. So two flats is B flat or B flat major, or it could be G minor, but because we know the song, we've heard it before, we know it's in major, we know it's in B flat major. So that's step one. Step two, what I like to do is sort of work from the bottom here up, and whoops, can't get to my, there we go. So I work from the bass up to the tenor usually. It doesn't really matter because you're just kind of getting the collection of notes and we're going to rearrange them afterwards. So from the bass up, we have a D. The baritones are on an F. The leads are on a G. And the tenors are on a B natural. So I don't have to write B flat or anything. It's just a B natural, which is different from the key, right? Because we have a B flat in the key signature, so B natural is an accidental. So this is our collection of notes. We have D, F, G, and B. Now I'm going to go over to my sort of blank sheet of paper. Oh, my dog's throwing a fit. Sorry, everyone. This sort of blank sheet of paper, and I'm gonna, you can do this in the margins, you can do this even if you're just kind of conceptualizing it in your mind, like, okay, I have a D, an F, and a, you know, etc. But if the visual aid I find helps. So you can say, okay, I have a D, I have an F, I have a G, and I have a B natural. Okay. So this is not how it's voiced in the music. You can see in the music, it's much more, it's a little more spread out between the two staves. Like you can't quite conceptualize it in thirds necessarily. These two are in thirds, but they're on two separate staves. You can't see sort of what's going on. So if you put them all on the same staff in the same octave, it's not quite stacked in thirds yet. So what I like to do is invert the chord until it is entirely stacked in thirds. So I'm gonna take this D and move it up an octave. So we're getting closer. Then I'm gonna take this F and move it up an octave. And now we have a nice little snowman looking thing. So that means the chords are stacked in thirds. Now, when the chords are stacked in thirds, as we know, when it's in simple form, everything's stacked in thirds and it's all in the same octave, then we know that the lowest note here is the root. So we know that this is a G chord of some kind. We don't know yet what kind of G chord yet, but the root is G. So it's some kind of a G chord. And from here, we can start determining the different intervals that we're seeing. And there's a couple of ways you could do this. So you could sort of go back to your piano. Again, it's super helpful to have this. So actually, let me pull one up here. So we have sort of our G here. Can everyone see my mouse? Kind of? Yeah. Okay. So we have our G here and we have a B natural, right? So we're like, okay, what interval is that? We have 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps away. So we know that it's a major third. We have a D. So we count 1, 2, 3. So we have a minor third. And then the F, we have 1, 2, 3, another minor third. With the sevenths, it's a little tricky, but you can kind of see from the G to the F, you can count the half steps. What I like to do for sevenths, since it's easier to just sort of invert them the other way, because a whole step above F is G, which is our root, right? So if it were a major seventh, it would just be a half step below the G, but we know it's a flat 7 because it's a whole step below the G. Does that make sense? That I've kind of like flipped it a little. It's just kind of a quicker way. Instead of counting out like 11 half steps or however many it is, you only have to count 2 or 1 in the case of sevenths. So that's sort of a visual aid that you have. So we have here, so we know that there's sort of a major triad on the bottom and then a minor 7 on top, which when you play it is a G dominant 7 or a G barbershop 7 when we're singing it. And it sounds like that. It won't be voiced in that way, but that's the chord that we have, right? Does that make sense so far? Does everything I've done make sense? Cool. Okay, so now if we go back to our music, that's not it. So we have our collection of notes here. Now we can sort of rename it. Now we know that it's a G dominant 7, which is just, you abbreviate that with just the number 7 and nothing else. And a capital G because it's a major triad on the bottom. So G7, now we know it's a G7. If you sort of want to take it a step further, maybe you've seen Roman numeral analysis before, and if you haven't, that's fine. It's used, I feel like it's not used too much in barbershop unless you're like an arranger, at least sort of colloquially. It's not talked about, at least for me, it really wasn't. So you might more often hear like, oh, it's a G7 as opposed to a Roman numeral. And what I mean by Roman numeral analysis is the chords are all sort of put into the context of do or the tonic, right? So we know that we're in the key of B flat, which is do. So then if we have some kind of G chord, then let me get my keyboard back up here. if we have some kind of G chord, what scale degree or what solfege syllable is G when we're in the key of B flat? So if we start here, then we end on G. So we know that it's La, or scale degree 6, in the key of B flat. So another way you could notate this is a G7 or a 6-7 chord. There's a whole business about seventh chords and like notating them and what they lead to. And that's, again, a whole nother week. It's a whole semester of classes, but it's sort of another way you can, notate it. But either way works fine, as really the goal is to be able to be like, okay, now that we know it's a G7, we can go in and be like, okay, so the leads are on the G, so the leads are on the tonic, they're on the root, great. That's not atypical. We have basses down here on the D, which is also not atypical. Basses are usually on the root or the fifth of a chord, not always, but a lot of the time. So if you're a bass singing this chord, going from the wheel B, maybe you have to like think a little higher. It's maybe less of a step down from the wheel. It's like a smaller interval than you think because you're on the fifth. We have baritones are on the 7th, also pretty common. Gonna have to sit on it a little bit. And then the tenors are on the 3rd. Pretty typical barbershop sort of arrangement. So that's sort of how you can determine like the parts and how you can tune things better and stuff. Does that sort of make sense to people? Does anyone have any questions about that process or anything? I'm like trying to see, I can't find the chat or anything. I don't think anyone. Cool. Great. Okay. Hopefully this is helpful. Again, teaching Zoom classes is super weird and it's difficult to sort of gauge what folks are getting out of this, but I find sort of chord analysis to be really useful in my singing. I think it makes me more informed and sort of just a better singer. So yeah, so we have some time left. I'd like to do this one more time, if that's okay, if I'm not like completely boring all of you with this stuff. Great, I'm getting thumbs up. Cool. So let's pick another chord at random. I haven't done this for any other chord, so maybe we'll pick a weird one. Let's see. Does anyone have a suggestion? What chord we want to look at? I'm trying to see if anything.
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Measure 6 so.
Measure 16 so.
Yes. There's an accidental added.
There is. You are right. Okay. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Thank you, Annette. Alrighty. Okay, so we've got this chord. I'm using my trackpad to draw. Sorry about that. Okay, so we already know we're in the key of B flat. So step 1, great. Step 2, we want to kind of, again, sort of take stock of the notes that we have. So the basses, what note is that? Again, you can go off mute and I'd like you guys to do most of this, but F. Perfect. Okay, and the berries?
B flat.
B flat, yes, it's good to note the B flat. And the leads are on?
D,
yes. Perfect. And then the tenors, we've got?
A flat.
Perfect, okay. So now we've got this collection of notes, F, B flat, D, A flat. So let's go back over to our piece of music here. And I'm just going to put them all in one sort of thing, if I can remember what it is. F, B flat, D, A flat. F, B flat, D, A flat. Okay, so this is spread out, obviously. This is sort of maybe similar to how it's voiced in the actual arrangement, just not in this octave, but kind of spread out. So when it's spread out like this, moving things just up and up and up can be, you'll start to get into those ledger lines and it can be sort of difficult to read. So then I just kind of start moving things around to see what I can sort of do. So I see that there's a gap here where the F maybe should go. So if I just move the F up, then we got our little snowman again. So that was easy. Our little four-tiered snowman. So now we can see that once again, the bottom note is the root, since we're all stacked in thirds. The bottom note is the root, which is B flat, which is our key. So that's pretty cool and fun. So we know that it's some kind of B flat chord, probably built on Do, probably some kind of one, like major one chord, because there are no other accidentals anywhere except for the seventh, which is most often where you'll maybe like see those accidentals show up. So yeah, so we kind of have our job done for us a little bit since we know the key is in B flat. And if we're just taking the triad here, we know B flat, D, F, that's already Do, Mi, Sol in our key. So we know we're starting off with a major triad. And then we have the seventh up here, which again, if we sort of, well, since it's flatted in the key, we know that it's not T, we know that it's a lowered T. But if we're taking this out of context, you could always go back to your keyboard and say, okay, I have a B flat and I have an A flat, which is a whole step below. So it's a lowered seventh as opposed to a half step, right? Because T, Do is that sort of half step between them. So we know what we have here is we have a major triad and then a minor seventh on top. Would anyone like to venture a guess what kind of chord we have? Maybe? Here, let me
Yes, a B flat 7.
B flat 7, yes. So same thing as we had last time, except on B flat. So we had the G7 was just a major triad with the flat 7 on top. Same thing with the B flat 7. So it's just a B flat 7. Great. Let me notate this here for this chord that we got. B flat 7. Or since B flat is Do in this key, it can also be a 1, 7. Cool, which is an interesting kind of chord. You'll see seventh chords. This isn't, you know what, I'm not even gonna go into this. I think there's another class about like the circle of fifths and arranging and stuff. Oh, there was an arranging class. I don't know if anyone went to that and sort of how chords move around the circle of fifths, and the sevenths all have to sort of do with that. But yeah, so now we did this second chord. It's a B flat 7. So now we know we've got, again, the basses on the fifth. Once again, we have the baritones actually on the root this time. The leads are on the third, and then the tenors are on the seventh, which again is also usually baries and tenors are like thirds, sevenths, depending. So that's not atypical. So yeah, tenors would like sit on it, basses would, dial it up a little again. So this is sort of the process of tuning. It's kind of weird. Like, I mean, if you're a lead, leads sort of have a different role in all of this. Leads sort of want to sing lines horizontally, like leads know what Do is, especially if you're in like a quartet. It's like, okay, I'm in the key, I maintain what the key is, and I sing it this way, as opposed to the harmony parts, which kind of have to tune to the lead in a way vertically, is a way that I like to think about it sometimes. So, you know, different parts will have different roles in all of this and stuff. But yeah, so hopefully this is helpful. This was sort of, I know we've got like 15 minutes left, but I really sort of wanted to just get into this chord analysis stuff, how to build them, what it means in barbershop and stuff. Does anyone have any questions? Do we want to do one more? Does anyone have any comments or things you're wondering about? Or, you know, we have time to talk about more stuff, but it's up to y'all, I suppose. If not, we can just do one more, I suppose.
Can I ask a question? If I were to look at this piece of music and I wanted to add a string instrument, like a guitar to it, would I'm getting an echo. It's weird.
I know,
But
is that me? No, I don't think so. But the echo's weird here, maybe.
What?
Sorry, go ahead.
Would I look at each measure or chord to play? I'd go on a B flat. I know how to do that. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, so if you wanted to, like, say, put accompaniment underneath this for like a guitar or whatever, you could do sort of reverse engineer what arrangers tend to do, which is, and for if there are arrangers out there and I'm saying something incorrect, forgive me. I don't arrange for barbershop very often, but typically they'll take a song that exists already and have the chords there for them, and they sort of like arrange them in a barbershop context. So if you were to sort of like reverse engineer that, you could sort of go through, it would be pretty meticulous to go through like every chord and do this whole process. And again, I mean, the more you do it, the faster it becomes and the better you get at it. You're like, you can just look at a chord and be like, oh, that's a B flat 7, whatever. It does take time, but another way you could sort of do that is a lot of times music will be arranged in sort of like little chunks of like, I mean, the harmony will move in sort of chunks. It's very rarely like note, 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 unless it's a really complicated arrangement. But a lot of the time you can have like one chord for this measure or for these 2 measures and another chord for the next 2 measures or something. And the chords that are sort of in the middle are sort of like passing chords that sort of outline the harmony or moving to different harmonies and stuff. So you don't necessarily like have to go through every, you know, note, 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 because that would be very meticulous. But a thing that you could do is look at the bass. The bass is really usually very telling. Again, it's usually they're on the root or the 5th. Not always, again, but very often they're on the root or the 5th of the chord. So you can kind of see how much they're moving. So like if I were to start from the beginning, they're on B flat. I know that they're kind of staying on, that indicates that the same chord is happening. Again, not always, but it sort of indicates like, okay, we're just doing a lot of B flat for a lot of the time. And even here on measure 3, we see that the basses are on B flat, but then they move down to an F, which is the 5th of B flat. So they're kind of like outlining a B flat. So it's like, okay, we're still in B flat territory. You know, so you can kind of look at that bass motion and figure out sort of where things are going, sort of intuit things. And then if you try it out and it sounds wrong, then you can always kind of nitpick a little bit. Does that make sense? Did that sort of answer your question? Okay, great. Cool. Does anyone else have anything to share or ask or anything at all?
Can we do another chord?
Yeah, let's do another chord in our last 10 minutes. Sorry I didn't prepare more. I know this is the awkward time where we're all kind of twiddling our thumbs like, okay, what do we do now?
down.
Great.
Go down.
Yeah, so let's go down. Let's do you want to pick one?
Yeah.
Ooh, hold on. 18. Measure 18.
Yep.
Oh, where was that?
That'd be good.
2. This one here was suggested. Where's my 18.2, right? Yeah. Let's do that. I like to circle it so I know what I'm doing. Okay, so yeah, let's do this chord quick in our last 10 minutes. So, okay, again, key of B flat. And again, take yourself off mute and we'll have a little free for all. So the basses are on what note?
D.
D. Right? The berries.
F.
F.
Perfect. The leads.
A.
Okay, great. And then the tenors.
C.
Perfect.
C.
Okay, so we have D, F, A, and C. So, lucky for us, this is already stacked in thirds. Whoa! Sometimes that'll happen. You'll kind of luck out and you won't have to do much work. Cool. So we already have our snowman, and we know that this is a D chord, some kind of a D chord. So we want to break it down a little further. I do want to mention too, this is sort of how I go through this process. When I'm thinking about chords, I sort of isolate the chord so I know that it's a D chord. And briefly, I sort of put my brain in the key of D. And that sort of, again, this comes with better practice and like sort of a better knowledge of key signatures and things. But in my brain, I know that, okay, key of D, it has an F sharp and a C sharp in the key of D major. So I'm looking at this and I see that neither the F sharp nor the C, or neither the F nor the C is sharped. So I know that those are going to be different from D major, if that makes sense. So I already know that this is a minor third, and I already know that it's a minor seventh because there's none of those sharps. That's sort of like a shortcut if you sort of know your key signatures. But again, if not, you can always go back to your piano, count out the half steps. You can listen to it and be like, that's a minor chord or that's a major chord, because oftentimes you can tell. So yes. So, okay, so we have, spoiler alert, we have a minor triad with a minor seventh on top, and it sounds like this. Cool. So let's go back, actually, since we kind of breezed over this, let's go back to our little seventh chart here. So we have a minor triad with a minor seventh on top. So just based on this chart, what kind of chord would that be? Minor triad and a minor seventh.
Minor seventh?
Minor seventh, yes. Yes. So what that means basically is a minor seventh is the same as a barbershop seventh, except the third is lowered a half step. So it's a minor triad instead of a major triad. I think they sound kind of cool. I think they're pretty sounding. Yeah. So cool. So we know we have a D minor 7. So let's notate that here. D M7. Oops. And that's how you would minor 7. You would do the lowercase m. And if we go back to our sort of visual aid here, I think we had, no, we didn't. Okay, so we're in the key of B flat. So what is D in the key of B flat? Like what scale degree? By scale degree, I just mean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those are all scale degrees as opposed to do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, which is solfege. There are two different, they're the same thing, just if you prefer numbers or solfege. But what would D be in the key of B flat?
5.
Let's see. If we start on B flat, we go do, re, right? And then we end on D on mi. So it's 1, 2, 3. If we were to go, oops, 4, 5. 5 is F. So that was close, but it's G would be scale degree 3 or mi. So that means this would be 3 minor 7. Yes, yeah, in the Roman numeral sense. So it'd be 3 minor 7. Cool. All right. Great. Y'all did great. I guess I will stop sharing my screen. I do just want to real quick plug once again. I'm not sponsored by musictheory.net or anything. I just think it's a fantastic resource. Really good. It has like little exercises too that you can do that you can like quiz yourself and stuff. It's really cool. It's great. I feel like I've been brushing up on my theory since doing this stuff. So we'll stop sharing my screen. Yeah, we've only got like 3 minutes left, but thank you all so much for joining me and bearing with me. This is my first time sort of teaching on this sort of scale. And I know, again, I'm not familiar to a lot of you all and stuff. So I appreciate you being here and sort of bearing with me as I stumble my way through. So yeah, any last minute questions? If not, you can fill out the Google form and go on your merry way.
Thank you, Meg. You did a very nice job